this district actually ran as its own country.
So you're the 48th generation.
We're 48.
A dream guest you would love to host.
For all hoteliers, late checkouts are stressful.
Thank you so much for being on our podcast, Host Diaries, Akshita.
Good to be here.
I'd love to get to know a little bit about Belgadia Palace. If you could tell me a little bit about its history, how did it become what it is today?
Yeah. So the Belgadia Palace is our ancestral home. It's been there for the past 200 years. It was built under the orders of Maharani Sumitra Devi, who was one of my ancestors. And it was built at a very interesting time because we call it Victorian architecture, but this is actually pre-Victorian. It was just one of the first colonial buildings that you see in the East. And so it kind of tells you about the foresight that a woman leader and a ruler had at the time. The way I look at it is we had had three capitals before that. In the 14th century and 8th century, those ruins still stand. But I believe by the time the British and the colonial powers had already started entering the East as big business and military forces. So I think this was her reaction of doing some brand redevelopment and putting a much more European, modern, at that age, looking building out there as a guest house for the foreign dignitaries who came to visit the royal family. So I think a lot of people assume that Belgadia Palace was where the families always lived, but we actually just moved into it in my grandparents' generation. Before that, it was only ever used as a property for tourists and travelers in the form of like governors, lords and ladies, and British officials.
Okay, so you just moved into it in the last two generations. Before that, it wasn't a hotel or a home or anything of that.
Yes. So actually, right after independence, my great-grandparents decided to give all the properties, the main three palaces of the erstwhile royal family of Mayurbhanj, to the respective governments they belong to. So the Summer Palace in Shillong became IIM Shillong. It is still run as an educational institute. The main palace in Calcutta, called Rajabagh, was given to the Bengal government, and it still runs as a government ITI. And the one in Mayurbhanj, Baripada, was given to the government of Odisha to become an education institute as well. So Belgadia was the only property they decided to keep, which is also the smallest. But I feel like that's probably because it had a lot of memories for them as well.
And I heard that you all went through this major restoration of the entire place, I think in the last 2015 to 2019 era. How was that restoration project? Like, did you guys completely uproot the entire thing, or did you guys maintain some aesthetics of the place and then sort of preserved it and you sort of, had the history intact?
So this was all actually a brainchild of my sister Mrinalika, because we were outside of the country for close to a decade. And she was really interested, after studying luxury brand management, to come back to India, back to our agrarian, rural hometown, Mayurbhanj, the district, and be able to restore the only property we had as a family left, basically, from the vestiges of the princely state, and restore it to its original sort of grandeur. So the skeletal of the property was kept intact, and most of the interiors as well, because we had furniture from all the different palaces. So that's really beautiful about it, that all the pieces that our guests experience, whether it's furniture pieces, decor, crockery, cutlery, is all from the princely era. It's just the wiring, the amenities, the electricals. It's more about making sure that the property stays just the way that it was in the bygone era, but all its amenities are of a world-class modern hotel.
So it's a good way of balancing heritage and sort of modern luxury.
Definitely. I feel like, for their time, like back in the day, they had the most modern appliances and electricals in any case. So I don't think that we should deny any of the travelers visiting Belgadia today the same opportunity to live in luxury.
And how close is it to, let's say, the largest city in Odisha?
That's a great question. One, just a little deep dive. Odisha is an eastern state in India, and Mayurbhanj is its largest district. So within Mayurbhanj, actually, we have one of Asia's largest biospheres, a recent national park, but it's always been an elephant and tiger reserve, the Simlipal Biosphere Elephant and Tiger National Park and Reserve, which is 2,750 square kilometers. So you can imagine just how large Mayurbhanj district is. So it's a 4-hour drive from Ranchi, Bhubaneswar, and Calcutta, and Jamshedpur is about 2 hours away.
Oh, so it's very close by.
Yes.
At least to Jamshedpur is very close
Yeah,
by.
and I will say we have some of the best roads. So I'm really glad that in Orissa, that's something you really enjoy, is that scenic drive, moving from a city, urban metropolis, and seeing these terracotta houses, beautiful lush greenery, and really the beauty of the Indian rural countryside as well as you reach Bulgaria.
There's restoration on one hand, right? There are many families who have heritage properties and they restore these properties, but they don't end up opening it up as a hotel. They restore it for themselves, maybe for their own legacy, but opening it up to strangers and inviting strangers to come into your home and experience what the city is all about is a whole different, persona of a person. So, what sort of made you take that leap of faith that made you feel that I want strangers to come and experience Mayurbhanj?
One, I think my sister had this vision where she was like, everything the state actually stood for, which is innovation, entrepreneurship, rural talent, being looking at cutting edge emerging technology. And we always heard these stories from, the teams who had worked with us, our family members, historians, academics. But a lot of these stories of places outside of cities is kind of lost. You hear about Nalanda, but today's day and age, most people might know about Harvard, right? So I think that when my sister came back, because she was like, we need to restore the place, I really understood the vision that she had in terms of we need to bring these places outside of cities back to giving it its regional prominence. And I think for us, a large part of the generation will forget its history. But they should always be proud of where they can come from. So I think for us, Belgaria became also a purpose-led initiative where we believed that it might become a microcosm of all the best parts of Orissa, showcasing Kalinga hospitality, showcasing our amazing craftsmanship, whether it's handicrafts, handlooms, whether it's our delightful regional cuisine. So from a property, we looked at it as very much as a platform. So when we opened up Belgaria, something interesting is that a percentage of funds from guests coming and staying with us at the Belgaria Palace actually go directly into the Mayurbhanj Foundation, a trust run by the family, which supports three nonprofits, mostly for education, healthcare, sports, as well as skill building. So I think something interesting for us was always looking at how tourism can be a vehicle for sustainable development and making sure that we weren't just restoring Belgaria, but being able to rejuvenate the local economy in Mayurbhanj as a district. And that's, I think, what really marries my sister's vision in terms of restoration with what you said about that became the decision and turning point for us in terms of what's the why behind having people experience this.
So, what kind of charities do you, or NGOs, or from this foundation do you support? Like, what causes?
Yeah.
I understand that it's education, but is it like women education? Is it upliftment of certain sectors of society? What is it exactly that the Mayurbhanj Foundation does?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, the Mayurbhanj Foundation, the way I looked at it is also because we studied abroad, I really liked the ethos of thinking about the hotel and tourism as a startup. It should be an incubator to be able to develop a product or ideas that are able to be entrepreneurial in nature. So, for example, what we realized is we can act as a beautiful intermediary between causes on ground and getting the right kind of attention to support these causes. So we support three nonprofits. One of them is the Future Star Sports Academy. It's young tribal youth who are being trained to be trainers as well as athletes. A lot of them compete for national and international sports. And some of them have become vice captains and captains to some of our national teams, especially in rugby, football, archery. The second thing we support is a nonprofit called Project Chowni, as well as a Dokra Artisans Cooperative and a Sabai Grass Artisans Cooperative. This is where we mostly help them with design intervention and market linkages. So every time a guest comes to Belgaria, we always include it within our experiences provided is to call an artist over to the palace to be able to interact with the guests. So it's not just shopping for them for these souvenirs, but really being able to understand the process of what we call dyeing crafts and some of the oldest crafts of India. And we also help them with market linkages. So we are able to connect them with design fairs, decor fairs, and actually even connect them with designers who can help them with modern, functional ways of selling their items. We recently had a guest who actually came to Mayurbhanj, loved the idea of Dokra, and she's originally from New York. So she's gone back to New York and started a bag collection with Dokra handles for her luxury bags. And she's selling them in New York. And all the handles of the first capsule collection, which are close to 500 to 1,000, are made from artisans in Mayurbhanj. And that's just one guest experience of visiting a handicraft cluster and creating a product line from it. There are dozens of stories of them being, we connect the artisans directly to the consumer at the end. We want to eliminate the middleman through tourism. And the last one is Siksha Sandhan, which is a nonprofit that we support for awareness. That's menstrual education, hygiene, wash. So the idea is that we're trying to look at certain villages and adopt them to holistically be able to help them with healthcare education. But the bottom line is, are you being able to move the needle on livelihoods and economies? So we always keep track to be like, have we been able to ensure sales increase? Have we been able to ensure that students are in school? Are we able to ensure that when there's natural disaster, our relief methods have helped out, not just at the time, but later on as well?
No, that's lovely. You actually took my next question out of my mouth, but you answered it in the last couple of things. But what I was basically going to ask you is that, are there any like sort of morning rituals or maybe evening rituals that you do in your property? It can be obviously including the community. It can be something that the hotel organizes themselves, but anything that sort of differentiates Belgadia from the rest of the noise that is there.
So I think one thing that I've realized that guests always tell us as feedback is, this property's been there for 200 years. My family traces its roots back to 697 AD. So we're the 48th generation of the Bhanj dynasty and family.
So you're the 48th generation.
We're 48.
Wow.
So and the first person in our family was Adi Bhanj, and I can name all 47 of them. So what's always been interesting for us has been that, for me, luxury is always rituals. It's actually about the fact that guests can stay with a family that may have old roots. Most Indian families will have that. But we do the same things we've been doing, not just for decades, but aeons and centuries. So I feel like, for example, there are two things that I have done my whole life growing up. One of them is we have a temple within the property. It's called the Ma Mangala Temple. And every day at 6 o'clock, the same family of priests who've been with us for generations come and do the same prayer. And guests can come and experience that. Whether it's the darshan of the murti that is that old, whether it's the heat of the flame of the aarti which comes out to greet guests. There's a smell of, incense and camphor and turmeric, which I think fills up the house in the evening. So I think those are beautiful things because the house has seen this ritual happening with different people, but with the same manifestation and energy for decades. A second thing we do, which is more contemporary, is Mayurbhanj Chho is a UNESCO dance form. Find Chho in the greater eastern area. But we realized that when these dance forms and these artisans, when patronage ended, basically, with royal families, kind of by 1947 having to give up most of their powers in certain ways, patronage also in a certain way ended. We try to make sure that these, our guests are able to experience these dance forms and, become, and maybe hopefully be able to inspire new age patronage. And so we have Mayurbhanj Chho performed every evening for guests. And that's, again, part of the guest experience. So these aren't additional elements we ask the guest. It's an option that they'd like to experience. Meeting a Dokra artist or a Sabai grass weaver or a Mayurbhanj Chho performance happens every evening. So in the evening, we actually have an auditorium, which is a terracotta auditorium, similar to what we used to have in the palace. And every evening, we have a performance of Mayurbhanj Chho. And the interesting thing about Mayurbhanj Chho was actually the kings themselves practiced this dance form. Because Chho comes from Choni, which the etymology might be barracks. So these were what the soldiers of the royal family's armies would practice to keep fit. So that's the way that a lot of the martial race in Mayurbhanj would, because a little bit of the backstory is Chho was basically a lot of the Paikas, so the soldiers of the royal family's armies were disbanded after the Paika rebellion. So a lot of them would tell the British, like Capoeira, that, we're just dancing. But actually what they were doing was playing with swords and shields in a dance format to be able to be fit in case the king ever called them back to fight a war.
Wow.
And that's still practiced today, after a few hundred years. And I think so it's important for guests to read and learn about that because we hear about the great wars of the Indian Empire. But Kalinga's warriors had a huge hand to play in building the fabric of the nation as we see today. And when you're experiencing that art form, it's not just a dance, it's a storytelling of an entire community's history. And so for me, that's another special experience that we have every day in the palace.
That's a beautiful form of rebellion.
It is.
Let's say if I was supposed to take a trip to Odisha, I go to
Mhm.
Belgadia, what would be the first thing that I would notice when I would enter the palace?
So I think the first thing we notice, and this is something that my grandparents would always do, is whenever we had visitors, the entire team comes to greet you. And there's always a traditional greeting, whether it's the turmeric that's on, sort of applied on your head as a tilak. Everything comes from the property. Everyone's always greeted at the door. And we used to always have this where you have drummers. So you have traditional drummers who greet you as the car pulls in. And I think for us, we always started with a property tour. So we treat the palace as a living museum because a lot of it is untouched with 2 or 3 generations living in it, but also numerous personalities who've been there for 200 years. So when you're walking through the palace, it's a little bit like a Wes Anderson home, right? Because there are different, a bit of mismatched or let's say avant-garde elements, but they all have a story. So some Scottish gentleman has come and left something there. Some painter came from Britain and has painted some murals. There were very famous artists from the Bengal Renaissance who came, and those were their studios. So actually to experience the property is to go in the beginning, in the first day itself, lends itself beautifully to understanding whose room you're in, what's the stories those rooms have hold, and then actually enjoying your experience from that point of view. So really stepping into that bygone era and bringing it to life.
What's your favorite furniture piece over there? And like, does it lend a story?
I think so many people may have seen this piece, but as you enter, there's a library on the right. And when I grew up, the house was actually a lot more formal in structure, right? So there were timings for everything. I don't think I entered my own library till 2, 3 years ago in restoration because you had to have a library card. There were certain books that you couldn't touch without gloves, and in certain conditions, we had a very, very strict librarian. But there's a massive table which used to be, I used to call it the correspondence room growing up because there would just be babus on typewriters. This is the 80s and this is the 90s, right? So letters would be going out. There'd be, later there were fax machines, etc. But this room would be like a press room and very Downton Abbey. But the table that was on, it's actually a very unassuming Burmese teak wood table with like these very beautiful engraved legs. But it was actually the table on which my great grandfather signed the instrument of accession.
Oh, wow.
So when Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was calling up all the princely states to join India, this was the table that in January 1st, 1949, the princely state no longer existed. It joined the Dominion of India. And I think that's a beautiful story to sometimes realize that this district actually ran as its own country. And there was a moment where someone had to make that decision that now we're going to be embracing a modern outlook. And, he sat there with his Senate and Parliament. And fun fact, Mayurbhanj actually ran as a constitutional monarchy from the 1930s. So there was already a Senate, so like a Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, what we have today, Mayurbhanj still has those properties and buildings. It had its own courts and currency and House of Parliament. So it was beautiful that there was a vision of these people to actually be statesmen and look forward for what held the country's best interests as well. And it was a simple piece of furniture that witnessed that act of history.
And it's still there.
And it's still there.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So how many rooms does the palace have?
So currently we have 15 rooms. So by the end of the year, we will be having close to 20. So the process of restoration never stops with heritage homes, right? Because you're always we shut down the property once a year for a month because we actually do restoration. We also are situated in a climatic, eco-sensitive zone. And once we had a professor who actually came and told us, because we keep doing a lot of R&D on the property and its history and its structure. And they were like, this is like a mandala. Like, this is a race against time. So what you can do with it till you have it is very important. But at the same time, we do have cyclones every year. We are in an area which has a very high moisture level and content. So it's interesting as we move into the history, being able to understand how to not just restore the properties, but maintain and consolidate them as well.
Okay, so dampness must be quite a big issue over there. Same thing in Bengal.
Yeah, so I think that, in the East, we have these fantastic properties. We also have a lot of pieces, whether it's oil paintings, whether it's heirloom pieces, textiles, fabrics, we need to be able to tell its stories as well as maintain them in a way that does justice to them. So it's a learning process, and that's why we also realized within the property there were older structures which we now converted to rooms, because we realized a lot of these homes weren't always built for functionality as much as leisure and enjoyment. And now we're trying to make sure that our guests get to experience interesting things, but also be able to retain that historical element of why these structures were there in the first place.
So, what kind of guests or travelers are sort of drawn to your property? Like, what would their persona be like?
Yeah. I think we're actually lucky that we're so close to Bengal, because Bengal has a really large appetite for unique travel in all ages. So I would say that the travelers who come are definitely curious. There's an interest for heritage craft and culture. Culinary tourism is huge. We have a lot of people coming in for 1 or 2 days, and they definitely want to see something within the property, like an experience. And a lot of them are interested in Simlipal, going there for a day because we have the world's only melanistic tiger. And then the two trends that I can say is we're seeing a lot of solo women travelers, which is interesting. And the second one is adventurous couple travelers. So solo women you can see between ages of 30 to 50, and Indians traveling in not just intergenerationally but with friends. So you can see groups of 6 to 7, couples who are traveling together, or maybe they have a buyout of the property and they're celebrating special moments, or they're going for like hikes or nature walks. So I think there's a new appetite for what people want to do when they're traveling now as well.
And is it mainly like Indian travelers, or you also get a lot of white people?
So I think that we've got a lot more inbound in the last few years during season. But the level, since we opened up in 2019, of domestic travelers has just shot through the roof. We are getting really interesting travelers. Like, we did a show called Raja Rasoi. We were talking about our food and cooking. And then we had
the one on Netflix?
It's, I think the season we were on is not on Netflix yet.
Okay.
But someone came from like Vizag to some part of Gujarat. We got someone from like Himachal who just saw that show, liked the story, wanted to come and experience it for themselves. So it's interesting who's hearing about you, because the first time we opened, for the first 6 months, we didn't even have a website. It was just on Instagram. And I think we were one of the first palaces to even be on Airbnb, because we were looking at a lot more. It was kind of like not the norm of how you go around doing hotel marketing. For us, it was extremely founder driven, which was new for the time. We were both in our 20s. It's a very millennial, Gen Z approach to word of mouth. We had like Spotify playlists for different seasons in Bulgaria. So I think there was a lot more of a younger energy of how we wanted people to know about the place, interesting events, unique itineraries, a strong cultural programming. And every year since we've opened, we've done an artist residency. So either it's a writer's retreat, we have emerging and established artists come and stay with us. So if you're staying at Belgadia, you never know who you're going to have breakfast next to.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So what is like the food of Belgaria like? Like, what is Mayurbhanj cuisine, let's say?
So we actually have an Oriya thali, which is it's a fan favorite. But for us, what we realized was our family had a lot of history, because all the women of our families came from different parts of the world, right? So my grandmother is from Nepal. My mother's mother is also from Nepal. My mother's from Jaisalmer. My grandmothers have been from Rajasthan and Gujarat. So especially when a woman came from a different royal household to one, she brought her cooks with her. And she brought her, a lot of her staff members from her previous, home to this home. So our food and cuisine is very unique to what we eat, because we eat a lot of like Nepali food. We have timur and other things. We have bamboo shoot, which has been acquired by different chefs. But our Oriya thali is, what I like about Oriya food is it's nothing like what you see in the north and the south. And I would say it's very differentiated from Bengal. Of course, there are similarities. But Oriyas have always been into understanding nutritional food, not mixing the taste with too many condiments and sauces. So when you're tasting something, you can taste the freshness of that vegetable or spice or grain. Also within Odisha, because it's a tribal-dominated state, and that has had a huge influence on the community and the family as well, the colonial powers, like especially the British, would go into places where they felt they could influence the local culture a lot. If you look at tribal-dominated areas, the British kind of didn't know what to do. They kind of put their hands up, right? They were like, these areas, we don't know what's happening there. Orissa, unlike Bengal, I think has kept to its even spices, its grains, the agriculture wasn't as contaminated. And I'm using that word only because a lot of the food we eat today, our ancestors wouldn't have eaten. Potatoes, tomatoes, chilies. A lot of our staple food actually has originated from different parts of the world. So in Orissa, if you go to the local bazaar, the haat, we take people to a village where people are selling different fruits and vegetables. You can actually get grains of spices, which you will not find anywhere else, because these are indigenous small scale farmers who have kept to their traditional farming methods. I don't think they realize what they're doing is organic. But you'll see, grains of rice I've never seen anywhere else. Huge high nutritional content, spices. We have GI tag turmeric. We have Simlipal honey, which is still hunted for in its traditional method. So we have a tribal community that goes into Simlipal, smokes out the beehives, collects the honey, and gives it to you on your doorstep, unadulterated. So a lot of the food of Mayurbhanj, one, I think, has that mix of foraged food. We do a lot of root to leaf. That means every part of the vegetable we consume in different ways. And I remember once we had a French guest who came and stayed with us. And he was like, "Oh my God, I didn't know you had escargot." And we were like, "Sorry, what?" And then he saw that on the local bazaar, they eat snails.
Yeah.
And he's thinking of mussels. And he's like, "Oh, that's like, super fancy." And we never realized that we had that to offer. The same way we have the GI and chutney, So we only realized when our foreign guests were coming and they would flock to it because it's great for calcium, for protein. But we just didn't realize and chutney was what we should have put on our menu at home. I think for a lot of heritage properties, the best thing that we've realized is look within yourself and your community for bringing out its stories. Maybe that's why you don't find avocado toast at Belgadia, but that's because we have a different form of what to serve you, such as muri mangsho, which is as delicious but comes from the community, which is mutton curry and puffed rice, served in the same way, in the same crockery and cutlery, whether that's kansa or blackstone, that's meant to be eaten with your hands in a certain way. So I think it's like celebrating your uniqueness is where our culinary traditions really kind of kick in.
I think that's lovely. I think it's so well put that people need to start looking inwards. When you have a property that is so beautiful, when you're preserving history, you're not just preserving the property, you're preserving the whole community around it.
Yeah.
What else is around the property? Are there like other eateries, or are there other places you can go to, or is it just jungle all around?
Yeah. I think this is a great question because my sister is someone who loves being within Belgaria and the palace, and of course, our lawns and everything. And I'm someone who's obsessed with everything Mayurbhanj has to offer. I belong to a place where I genuinely am so passionate about everything there. So one I'm going to start off with is nature. We have a swimming pool, but this is what I recommend is there's a waterfall nearby where you can climb. It's called Sita Kund. The local mythology, if it's to be believed, is that goddess Sita herself bathed in these waters. And so before you get married, young women are asked to bathe in these waters to come out beautiful, like goddess Sita. And so when you go to this waterfall, there's 7 kunds. So if you just keep climbing near the waterfall, you can see 7 of these waterfall pool areas. So we've actually climbed all the way to the 6th one and jumped into the waterfall. Now, where else in the world can you do this, right? For me, that's absolute luxury that you get to be in nature and enjoy nature for all of this. But we have a lot of lush green rolling hills, a lot of waterfalls. Of course, because of the agriculture, you see these beautiful, terracotta thatched homes of tribal communities right along rivers and little valleys and troughs. That's beautiful. But for me, a fan favorite, again, is Simlipal. It's an elephant and tiger reserve. So to be able to go into a reserve, which is a tropical forest, unlike what you see in the north and center, the central belt of India, because you can see those, fields. So over here, it's lush green tropical forest. And I've always said this, that Simlipal is the lifeline of Mayurbhanj. Because whenever we were under attack by the Mughals or the Nawabs of Bengal or the Marathas, the royal family and the community of Mayurbhanj, which at this point is 30 lakhs strong, it's not a small population, would retreat into the Simlipal forest and do guerrilla warfare. So we've never actually been invaded and conquered by any army because our forest could not be breached and we were the only ones who knew how to live within the forest. So I think that's something beautiful to remember, is how nature has also protected and shaped the history of a community. Simlipal is beautiful for hiking, for trekking, for going to the buffer area, for bird watching, apart from obviously the big game spotting, elephants, tigers. And something I love is that Simlipal still has a lot of communities residing around it. So you get to see these beautiful villages where every quarter during the monsoons and before the rains, they actually hand paint all the village homes in these beautiful Santhal art forms. So, when you're going to these places, I love it because it's off grid. You can't find this on Google Maps. And you're actually being able to see what it's like to be in a village where everyone has a community story and comes together for these really interesting ways of living together. Yeah.
I heard the entire project was women led, the restoration project. Is that true? Like, was it, I mean, especially in heritage restorations, that's something completely unheard of.
Is it? I don't know. So, I mean, women led in the sense of one, Mayurbhanj has a strong female story. The president of India is from Mayurbhanj, Srimati Draupadi Murmu. She's an hour from Belgadia, her hometown. But apart from I love dropping it in every conversation that the president of India is from Mayurbhanj. Because she once met me when I was getting an award and she felicitated me for the award. And in a lineup, I was like, I'm not sure the president's going to know who I am, right? Like, and then she looks at me, she stops, she's like, oh, ye to hamari gaon se hai. And it was like a highlight moment of my life to be like, two girls from Mayurbhanj here in Delhi. But apart from the president being there, Mayurbhanj actually as a princely state was both a matrilineal and a patrilineal lineage. That means that queens could also be on the throne and as well as men. This is actually seen across India and many parts of South Asia. It was the British who came in with the doctrine of lapse. So for people who don't know, the doctrine of lapse meant that if a royal family had no male heir, the entire kingdom went into the hands of the British and basically the East India Company. That's when a lot of Indian families started focusing also on having a male heir. But other than that, in our 48 generations of history, there are clearly marked times when it's like Maharani Sumitra Devi or some other woman's name. So it's the Mayurbhanj always recognized the power of women. And incidentally, our Ichta Devi, our goddess we pray to, is Ma Chamunda. So all the goddesses in Mayurbhanj are our main forms of devotion and worship. And we actually have a really interesting story because we have a Rath Yatra. I just celebrated the 450th Rath Yatra in Mayurbhanj. It's called Dvitiya Srikhestra because Baripada after Puri is the most auspicious and famous one. It's also one of the oldest. And it's the only place in the world where Goddess Subhadra's chariot during the Rath Yatra is pulled only by women. It started in 1975, so we've completed 50 years of doing this. So to your question of did we do the restoration women-led? I can't say that, but I can say that I'm sure the influence is there because we come from an area which really prides women entrepreneurship and sort of vision. It was definitely led by my mother and sister. I was someone who I think I piggybacked off of what I realized. Like I mentioned, they were interested. They saw the vision for how the property could affect the district, and I leapt in. But yes, I mean, all the people, we definitely initiated it, but a lot of the hands of the artisans who have helped restore Mayurbhanj have been both women and men of the region. I think that's an important thing to consider is like, who is the person who's laying the bricks? Who's the person who's being able to, keep your gardens a certain way or understand that you can't use chemical paint on your walls. We really had to find artisans from Murshidabad and parts of Bengal and parts of the border of Bengal and Mayurbhanj who had worked or their ancestors had worked on houses like this. Because they knew that you have to use eggshells, lime and mortar and honey and you can't use chemicals on this. And I remember this one carpenter said, you can't have you realized you're putting AC in a room which has never had AC for 200 years? They knew how to take care of frames and art pieces because they'd worked on so many old homes. So it's definitely, we cannot say that the restorations happened by a few people. It was probably it's a few thousand hands that have led to it. And I think that even transpires to why Belgadia Palace was nominated alongside Mayurbhanj in the Time. That was our big moment. Was Time magazine called us and said, you've been nominated for one of the 100 greatest places in the world. We're going to list you. And we're going to list Mayurbhanj. Belgadia Palace is going to be mentioned. And for us, we were like, oh my God, like that's the biggest honor of like 5 years of us being, a property. But we realized it's because every guest may not meet me or my family, but every guest is a team. And the team is hired locally. They've been trained from within the region. And some of them have maybe worked abroad or worked within India and come back, but most of them are from the villages of Mayurbhanj. So for them to be the first people you meet, it's their impression, it's their warmth, it's their candor, it's their way of preempting what the guest needs and learning. Like I saw some of my team members who couldn't speak Uriya, they spoke Santali a couple of years ago, speaking and conversing with a French guest on how he likes his cappuccino. And I was floored. I was like, wow, like a team member has come so far in their journey and they represent Mayurbhanj. And I always wonder, like, why do they do it? Why do they just, this is just a job for them? And I realized because they don't treat it like a job. They treat it like this guest who's come is experiencing my home. It's my palace. It's my hometown. And if they go back and have a bad or negative review or reaction, it affects how people will see the entire region.
Yeah,
I think those are all elements when you talk about restoration, right? It's really about the frontline stuff.
I think that's a lovely answer. And when you go into these restoration journeys, there's so many palaces that are currently just lying. If you really think about it, they're not being taken care of. You can see it even in Bengal. You can see it in all parts of India. To that note, there are many people who want to restore it.
Correct.
We have so many bodies that have come up. Right? There's Intac, which is literally based out of Calcutta, obviously expanded many other places. But the idea is they all are looking towards restoring. There are many owners, there are kids of many owners who have come back from their education and now they want to restore. So since you have already gone through this process, if you would have any advice for the people who want to sort of restore their palaces or working in projects of restoration of heritage buildings in India, what would you say to them?
I think be proud of where you come from, stick to what you know. Every family in India has a story, and everyone's home has something unique to offer. The best Michelin star chefs in the world are probably lying within your grandmother's recipes and kitchens. So this idea that we have to have the biggest home or the most lavish and opulent way of living is not true at all. What people are looking for is authentic, unique stories. And where the one line I'll add is doing good is good for business. So if you can find a way to help your community, support your community, give your community a platform, you will reach newer heights within whatever you're doing. Today, it's important for these historic and heritage homes to have a relevance to their community. It cannot be a private enterprise, which is profit-making and living in isolation. The fortress style type of hotel resorts does not, I don't think it is as appealing to a modern consumer. They want purpose-led, impactful brands. They want transparency with what they're paying for and the value they get in return. So for me, if you have one room in your house, if you have a meal you can serve, if you can serve 2 cups of chai, if you can, you don't even need to speak English fluently. You need to be able to have the belief that you can, your warmth and hospitality can transfer. And whatever you have to offer, of course, it needs some marketing, branding, and a good product design. But this is the time. So more than 50% of India's population is under the age of 30. And by 2030, we'll have 50 million Indian travelers going all over the world, especially domestically. So right now, I think that, there are so many ways that people are being able to, especially through word of mouth, social media, digitization, net penetration as well. It'll really age the young hotel entrepreneur. So the time is ripe, and there's never a better time than to throw yourself into this. And I think also having a heritage home is a process of, while you restore the home, is a process of self-discovery and identity as well. So for a lot of people who left their homes to study abroad, to go to a different city, this is the right time to come back and see if you want to start something, and don't doubt that it'll work well.
So while I was doing some research about the property yesterday, I found a very interesting story. So most people know about Tata Steel.
Yeah.
But very few people know that it was your ancestor, Maharaja Sri Ramchandra Bhanjdeo, who played a key role in making it happen.
Right.
So can you sort of elaborate or take us back to that story as to exactly what happened?
Yeah. So when I was growing up, a lot of the older staff in our family would always tell us these stories, and they would say, there was this one Parsi gentleman who came, and he was, there was a long negotiation for a business deal. He came and stayed at Belgadia because, of course, Belgadia was the home that foreign dignitaries came to visit. The royal family lived in the main palace. And there was some business that happened with it. Really, there was an interesting story around it, or an interesting business proposition. And growing up, I have no idea who this Parsi gentleman is, what this business is. And I was one of my first jobs in India when I came back from New York is working with the Tata Trust in Mumbai. And while I was sitting in the office with a lot of the leadership of Tata Sons and Tata Trust, they were celebrating 75 years of, or 125 years, sorry, of the Tata Trust. And someone brought up, they were like, yeah, but we have to mention something about how Tata Sons started and which were areas they started in, etc. And then they were like, oh, of course, there was this king of Mayurbhanj who had given the financial concessions for the first Tata iron ore mine to be formed in Asia in Gormasani in Mayurbhanj. And immediately I'm like executive level intern in this room, and I'm like taking down these notes, and I was like, did they just mention my family? And so I go back and I rummage through all the old books and I talk to my family, and I realized that Mayurbhanj had a very foresighted, visionary ruler, Highness Maharaja Sri Ramchandra Bhanjdeo. And he brought in, he traveled the world even as a teenager to learn about how the latest inventions were being used. He went to Africa, he went to Japan, he was part of the first Indo-Japanese diplomatic mission from India in the early 1900s. He obviously traveled to the UK, he had studied there, but his idea was, how do you bring in infrastructure? How do you create special economic zones to bring in business? How do you make sure that both the air, land, and sea are being used, so goods can be transported, but also people can go to certain areas? He built some of the finest education institutes as well as hospitals in Odisha, which still stand today, SCB in Cuttack, as well as Ravenshaw in Odisha. And then, of course, it was his own sons who, going through their father's learnings, decided to open up all the palaces into educational institutes. So he had hired, as I'd mentioned, and they had different ministries in Mayurbhanj from the early 1900s. So you had the Ministry of Archaeology and the Ministry of Mining. Now you have to understand that at this time, mining doesn't exist, right? This is the late 1800s.
Yeah.
They're still deciding how mines can be used for steam engines, for railways, for powering. And so in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, he hires someone called P.N. Bose, a very famed geologist for his time. And he tells P.N. Bose that, there's scope for mining here because we have iron ore, we have a number of other minerals as well, natural resources. And P.N. Bose writes this historic letter, which is still, if you go to Jamshedpur and the Tata archives, you see this letter there. And the P.N. Bose in that letter says, His Highness the Maharaj of Mayurbhanj would like to invite J.N. Tata to actually come and visit Mayurbhanj and Gormasani to see if there's possibility for mining, and we're happy to give financial concessions, because he believed, like J.N. Tata, that India should be able to have its own industries without the hand of the British in it. So it was actually at the time one of the biggest public-private partnerships in India in the turn of the century, to be able to have Indians being able to mine and create a special economic zone. Unfortunately, Jamshedpur at the time, which was part of Mayurbhanj, then became Jamshedpur, part of Bihar, then part of Jharkhand. But at the same time, I feel like it's an important story for people to know that some of the most entrepreneurial innovations or public-private partnerships didn't necessarily happen in cities. They happened in these pockets of cradles of civilization. These stories should not be forgotten. Yeah.
So it's like the formation of Tisco that basically happened in Mayurbhanj and modern day Tata Steel.
Yeah, so the family actually had bonds in the Tata conglomerate, and I realized that in World War I, when all the royal families were asked to, be part of the war effort and actually contribute funds or men, Maharaja Sri Ramchandra Bhanjdeo had a very untimely death very early in his life, and so his son, who was a teenager, gave up our family's shares and bonds for the war effort. To help, because at the time what was promised to royal families was that if we help the war effort, the British will leave India. That didn't happen, but I'm glad that the family always stood by philanthropy first.
I have a question about you. So you could always, since you've lived in so many countries, you've lived in so many cities, you're part of a royal family. You could have been behind, velvet ropes, but you often chose to be roaming around tribal villages with a backpack and camera, as we can see all over your Instagram. So where does this curiosity sort of come from? And what's the most unforgettable thing that maybe you've captured in Mayurbhanj when it comes to roaming around in the tribal areas?
Yeah. It's very interesting insights and research, because I always used to be like, I feel like I'm Shah Rukh Khan from Swadesh. In my Stan Smiths and a high ponytail, like walking through villages. But I think that curiosity just comes from the way my family has always lived their life, right? Like these were people who, like, why did my ancestors decide to travel to Japan in the turn of the century and not live in England? They decided to go to Madagascar to find sabai grass and bring it back to Mayurbhanj. So I think like there was always exploration and curiosity in my family about the way they lived their lives. So I think that translates down to us. I feel like belonging to an erstwhile royal family, even today, it's a lot of privilege and responsibility. And honestly, I'm just lucky that I was born into a family that has a passion for so many things that I have an inbuilt desire to understand. So to answer your question, I think it's just the way that we were born and raised, and we saw people in our family behave. The most curious thing, more interesting thing that I saw was probably Mayurbhanj had 3 different palaces, and the way we can trace back our lineage is actually with architectural ruins in different parts of the district. One is in Kiching from the 8th century. It's a temple. The other one is the 14th century Haripur Garh. And Haripur Garh is actually found in Akbar's biography, the Akbarnama. So that's how we learned of the history of a family from different biographies written throughout history as well. So I think for me, like, was rediscovering the temple Kiching, which we should always go to from the 8th century, and Haripur Garh as well, and taking an active part in restoration. So I think like the monuments and studying them and getting, doing artist residencies and retreats, so people actually go to these monuments to understand the power they have, the communities who live alongside them. I think those are really interesting in terms of more tangible heritage. And it's always interesting to think about, right? Like these are the last monuments you see of a dynasty, which from 8th century and 14th century had to move the entire capital of their kingdom because there was invasions. And then you realize that you're standing on what was probably battlefields of, because what's most interesting to me about royal families is not that they are there, because they probably were there because of some form of violence at some point, right? Either they're being attacked or they have to attack. I think what's interesting about royal families is their longevity, their resilience, their grit, right? Because you've overcome famine, starvation, drought, wars, invasions, colonization. You're still standing. And that's because of a lot of people who banded towards a vision you have. So you have to still always look for that vision. And today, to be honest, I find it in people like Usha Rani. She's a sabai grass weaver from Gohaldihi in Mayurbhanj. Over 10 years, she's a first-time entrepreneur. She comes from a family that was below the poverty line. She's been able to learn entrepreneurship, go for government scholarships on her own against her family or village supporting it, and trained close to 5 to 10,000 women artisans to be part of cooperatives, learn a skill, and become businesswomen. So I think that like that's always interesting to be like understanding your history, but seeing it in contemporary forms of who are now ambassadors of this place, and how can you all both be still part of each other's stories?
Lovely. So I did send you this question bank, but I didn't send you the second page.
Oh, wow. Woo.
Yeah. Because what we
Okay.
do at the end of this is we have a quick rapid fire round.
Lovely.
Okay?
I
Where I
love
ask you some
rapid fire.
fun questions. Here it goes. So what's always on your breakfast menu no matter what?
One of our ragi pancakes or millet-based pancakes, they're really yum.
Oh, lovely. Early check-ins or late checkouts? What's more stressful to the team?
Early check-ins are not stressful. I'm just going to say it for all hoteliers, late checkouts are stressful.
One local dish that everyone must try.
Muri mangsho, but I'm going to also say pokhalo.
Hosting or being hosted? What's more fun?
I love hosting.
A dream guest you would love to host or have hosted already?
I messaged a celebrity who I really like because I love her storytelling, and it was Konkona. So I thought she was a dream guest. But another dream guest I think we'd love to have is maybe William Dalrymple.
Your dream guest is coming to stay, following this question. Which room would you give him?
That's a great question. My favorite room is the Bengal Renaissance Suite.
One object in the palace that holds a secret that nobody knows.
When we were doing the restoration, we would be working on one room and suddenly like the wall would give way and we'd find something there. And we actually found an entire done secret, like not a secret room, but a secret area. And I feel maybe it could have been like an interesting speakeasy.
Yeah, that would be cool. One modern change your ancestors would be shocked by.
Probably the fact that we have like modern day speakers when every room has like a 100-year-old gramophone to it.
That was lovely. That was lovely. Thank you so much, Akshita.
Thank you so much for having me. These were really insightful questions, and rarely do we get asked something which has both the gravitas as well as candor to answer them. This was really fun. Thank you so much. And now you have to come visit us to experience everything I spoke about.
100%. I would love to. I would love to actually someday.
Amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.